Tonight we have the remarkable story of a man who says when it comes to Los Angeles, the CIA hasn't always played by the rules.
The agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
Wait a minute, if you don't mind what's going on here, please, now.
It began to become apparent to me that guns were going one way and drugs were going another.
The CIA has issued a blanket response to all of this, denying any involvement.
My name is Mike Ruppert, R-U-P-P-E-R-T. I did bring this information out 18 years ago, and I got shot at and forced out of LAPD because of it. I've been on the record for 18 years.
We got on record everywhere we could so that if I did get killed, we would know. You know, somebody would know that somebody was saying something was wrong with CIA.
Mr. Speaker, members, I rise today really with a very heavy heart, one that is filled with sorrow for the families and the loved ones who were killed and injured this week. Only the most foolish and the most callous would not understand the grief that has really gripped our people and millions across the world. This unspeakable act on the United States has really forced me, however, to rely on my moral compass, my conscience, and my God for direction. September 11th changed the world. Our deepest fears now haunt us. Yet I am convinced that military action will not prevent further acts of international terrorism against the United States. This is a very complex and complicated matter. Now, this resolution will pass, although we all know that the President can wage a war even without it. However difficult this vote may be, some of us must urge the use of restraint. Our country is in a state of mourning. Some of us must say, let's step back for a moment. Let's just pause just for a minute and think through the implications of our actions today, so that this does not spiral out of control. Now, I have agonized over this vote, but I came to grips with it today, and I came to grips with opposing this resolution during the very painful yet very beautiful memorial service. As a member of the clergy so eloquently said, as we act, let us not become the evil that we deplore.
Thank you, Demetrius, and thank all of you. I am unbelievably gratified to see so many people here tonight. I almost got up here and said, hi, my name is Mike, I'm an alcoholic, but I think I'm at the wrong meeting, I guess. We're going to talk about a lot of things tonight that are very difficult, a lot of things tonight that are very challenging, a lot of things that will test and try many of us in the months and the years to come. But we're going to have a certain approach to this, and it's the only kind of approach that I have found in 23 years that works when you're challenging a government that no longer serves the interests of the people. I'd like to start off by asking a question, like a show of hands. How many people in the room tonight believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman and solely responsible for the murder of John F. Kennedy? Show of hands. 2 hands, and they're both joking. How many people in the room tonight believe that the war that is now taking place and getting ready to move all over the world is solely the result of the attacks on the World Trade Center on September the 11th? Okay, all right, great. The approach that we're going to take tonight is very straightforward. I was, for some short period of time, not as much as I wanted to be, an investigator with LAPD. I worked narcotics, I was loaned to detectives, I worked a homicide table, I worked a burglary table and an auto theft table for a while. And there is a procedure that you follow when you are presenting evidence. There is a way that you structure evidence to avoid speculation, and there is a way to fight this government. And before we start into the details on September the 11th, I want to show you two dramatic examples. I have two short clips of video that I would like to show you. And if we can run the first one, this will set the tone for what we're going to talk about tonight and what we're not going to talk about tonight. For 38 years, as of November 22nd, just a few days ago, we have had a videotape showing clearly that John F. Kennedy was shot from the front and not the back, where the Warren Commission says that Lee Harvey Oswald was, up and behind to the right in the Texas School Book Depository. You look at this tape, and there is clear, convincing, incontrovertible evidence. Yet what good has it done us? What has it done to change the government? What has it done? What have we, meaning the American people, accomplished with this piece of video that shows his head moving backwards as a result of a bullet impact from the front of his head? It hasn't changed anything. I want you to bear that in mind, because I'm going to use the word "you" a lot tonight. And by you, I mean the American people. I'm talking to you as if I was talking to all 280 million people in this country. And I'm going to say some things that are going to be kind of backing you into a corner. And that is my direct intent. So some of the things we are not going to talk about tonight are speculations about the attacks on September the 11th. We are not going to talk about were there explosives in the building, were the planes piloted by remote control, any of those questions, because those are speculative questions that produce the same kind of results that we just saw on the tape. After 38 years, you can play that all you want, and it doesn't change anything. There are people who have been talking about the Oklahoma City bombing since it happened in 1995. We have videotape of U.S. military personnel machine gunning the Branch Davidians at Waco. We have proof up the galore. We're not here looking tonight for proof. We're not going to go home and have armchair discussions, because what's at stake now is our freedom. What's at stake now is our future. This is no more time to go home, and you'll see that before I'm through tonight. Now, there is another way to take on the government. There is another way to take on the lunacy of the mass media. And that is by using their own statements and their own evidence against them to prove that they are lying. Because if you're in this room tonight, you are probably already the choir. Our safety, our future, our liberty, our country, and maybe the planet depends upon us reaching out to the millions of people out there who are still waving the flag, still believing that this is a war like they're being sold on CNN. Now, I'm going to play another tape now, and I'm going to show you what happens when you confront the government with their own information head on. This is a confrontation I had with the Director of Central Intelligence, John Deutsch, at Locke High School in 1996 over the issue of the CIA bringing drugs into Los Angeles. I want you to watch his hands very carefully after I confront him.
Sir, the man in the leather
That's
jacket.
Congresswoman Juanita Millender McDonald of Compton.
I will be coming back
Hi.
over. I'll put you.
I am a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, and I work South Central Los Angeles, and I will tell you, Director Deutsch, emphatically and without
Can you speak
equivocation.
further into the mic, sir? These mics don't seem to be...
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
obvious lead. That is an answer for a lot of you. Now, can you please? All right, now, can you please?
I refer direct.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute here. Wait a minute. If you don't like what's going on here, please leave now. Leave. No, leave now, because there are others who do want to hear what's going on in this room. Will you please take your seats? I will come back to you as we roll back across to the center section.
Director Deutsch, I will refer you to 3 specific agency operations known as Amadeus, Pegasus, and Watchtower. I have Watchtower documents heavily redacted by the agency. I was personally exposed to CIA operations and recruited by CIA personnel who attempted to recruit me in the late 70s to become involved in protecting agency drug operations in this country. I have been trying to get this out for 18 years, and I have the evidence. My question for you is very specific, sir. If, in the course of the IG's investigations and Fred Hitz's work, you come across evidence of severely criminal activity,
let him speak
and it's classified, will you use that classification to hide the criminal activity, or will you tell the American people the truth?
Watch his hands. Watch his hands.
All right, you want to hear the response first from Congressman Julian Dixon and then from the director. Wait a minute. From York, I'm sorry, sir. I will allow the director to speak first and then Congressman Julian Dixon.
If you have information about CIA illegal activity in drugs, you should immediately bring that information to wherever you want, but let me suggest 3 places. The Los Angeles Police Department.
Gotcha.
Please. I'm sorry, others want to hear this answer. I am sorry, others want to hear this answer.
It is your choice, the Los Angeles Police Department, the Inspector General, or office of one of your Congress persons from this.
18 years ago, sir, and I got shot at for it.
Wait a minute, sir. Wait a minute, sir.
And?
Sir, you have not gotten the mic yet. You are not. But wait a minute, then don't speak out of turn.
Let me say something else. If this information turns up wrongdoing, we will bring the people to justice and make them accountable.
All right, Congressman Dixon.
Thank you, sir, for coming.
Wait a minute here. I thought you did not want to be here, but now that you are here, please let us hear and listen. Thank you very much.
Sir, I want to thank you for coming. You were at the last meeting. The staff probably had the spelling of your name wrong, but
No, they didn't.
We would like to talk to you. We have been looking for a couple of days for you, and we want to make sure that you contact the committee, because obviously you have some valuable information. If you want to give it to me privately, if you want to hand it to that aide where I can contact you this evening, please do it. Don't let us get away without getting a contact for you.
Thank you, sir.
Pass it up to him now so everyone can see that I got it. That would be fine.
Thank you, sir. And for the record,
Please keep the noise down so that we can hear and we can get answers.
For the record, my name is Mike Ruppert, R-U-P-P-E-R-T. I did bring this information out 18 years ago, and I got shot at and forced out of LAPD because of it. I've been on the record for 18 years nonstop, and I'll be happy to give you, Congressman, anything that I have.
I have to tell you that that was probably the most fun I've ever had in my life. Although tonight may top that. If you can kill the blue on the VCR there. What happened after this was John Deutsch was guaranteed an appointment by Bill Clinton to become the next Secretary of Defense. My confrontation with John Deutsch cost him that appointment. My good friend Dick Gregory, who I just did a radio show with on Thanksgiving Day, called me up and said he said he was talking to some people in Washington, and they just chewed him up one side and down the other because he looked like a fool. Everybody here seen The Wizard of Oz? Everybody here seen The Man Behind the Curtain? We have to get to the man behind the curtain, but it's going to be a little bit scarier than that movie was to do that. So, let's take an approach to September the 11th along the lines of an investigator presenting a case to a grand jury, or along the lines of a detective presenting a case to a district attorney. First of all, who am I? We're going to go through this really quickly. I had the misfortune of being born into a family that was heavily rooted in the intelligence community. My mother was a cryptographer and cryptanalyst for the Army Security Agency and National Security Agency during World War II. She worked for Secretary of State Cordell Hull. She worked on the Japanese and Russian codes. By the way, we did know the Japs were going to attack Pearl Harbor, and we did let it happen. This is evidence that I would present. This is my mother's separation from the NSA in December 1949 because she was going to have babies. She didn't have me until 51. But my dad was also recalled into the Air Force during the Korean War. He went to work for Martin Marietta and went to work on projects like the Titan 3C, which put up all the CIA's keyhole spy satellites. Relatives of my father were OSS, that's the forerunner of CIA, and they were career at CIA in Langley. So everybody in the family had a clearance. I used to come home from school and say, "What's for dinner?" And Mom would say, "I can't tell you." That's a joke, I hope. Now what I need is a way to do this so that I don't get them all whacked up here. Continuing with the presentation, there's a couple of points I want to make here in Portland. This is one of my rating reports from LAPD showing an outstanding rating, showing also that I have, especially in the field of narcotics enforcement and investigative procedures, I was loaned to Wilshire Division Narcotics several times and specialized in narcotics. I was even sent to a training school by the U.S. Department of Justice and the DEA, which I attended. You don't get that for writing parking tickets. And the reason why I say this is because the ranking member of LAPD in the room that day when I confronted John Deutsch told Ted Koppel that I had never worked narcotics. And that got me pulled from a live interview with Ted Koppel. The ranking member of LAPD in the room that day was Deputy Chief Mark Croker. Yeah, I'm having fun already. Now I want to talk about CIA dealing drugs briefly because I have to lay a foundation. You have to understand the economic and the political context in which this war is taking place and in which it is set. And there's two things that if you don't understand, you will never understand September the 11th. One is drugs, the other is oil. Or one is oil, the other is drugs, okay? We want to talk about evidence. We want to talk about proof, okay? This is a memorandum that was written February 11th, 1982 to the Honorable William J. Casey. Everybody remember Bill Casey from Iran-Contra? CIA Director, signed by Attorney General William French Smith. This was at the beginning of the Contra War, very early in the Reagan administration. And something had happened before this. There had been a series of negotiations. Now, in the CIA, the highest rung on the food chain is called an officer. If you are a case officer at CIA, you are someone who cannot be disavowed or denied. You are a man of the cloth. You are a man blessed with immunity. The agency will protect you. But underneath that on the food chain, they have career agents, contract agents, foreign agents, informants. They have proprietary companies, employees of the there's a whole category of people. Well, in 1982, because the CIA knew there was going to be a massive explosion in cocaine trafficking that they were going to control, U.S. Cocaine consumption went from roughly 80 metric tons in 1979 to 600 metric tons by 1987. Think about that for a minute. That's a lot of coke. All right? They knew that was coming. All right? So one of the things they did legally, because the agency and the government, they always find paper ways to try to cover their trail, and they think nobody will catch them. One of my favorite lines of all time, and for the first 100 of you who got here, you got a free copy of my last issue of From the Wilderness, is from Alan Dulles, who, when the Warren Commission report was released, however many volumes there were, and you read those volumes and you know that Lee Harvey Oswald didn't kill John Kennedy. And Alan Dulles said, the American people don't read. You don't read. This memorandum says, first of all, they took all the people who were not case officers and they decided to call them non-employees of the Central Intelligence Agency. There's a federal law stating that if a federal employee breaks a federal law, you have to report him. They were caught on the horns of a dilemma. So first they said, well, all these people are not employees, even though they get CIA paychecks. And then they said, in light of these provisions and in view of the fine cooperation, the Drug Enforcement Administration has received from CIA no formal requirement regarding the reporting of narcotics violations has been included in these procedures. That's black and white evidence of a conspiracy. The Attorney General of the United States just told the CIA director he no longer had to report it when anybody other than a case officer was dealing drugs. Let's look at something else about how cynical these people are. Now, I've been studying CIA and the drug trade for about 23 years, and this is one of my favorite documents of all time. Some 28 C-130 Hercules were smuggled by the CIA and the Pentagon through the U.S. Forest Service into private hands, supposedly for the purpose of fighting forest fires. The problem is that some of them turned up in Peru, in Mexico, in Panama, in Angola, in Iran, and Iraq, running covert missions for the CIA. One of these C-130s was caught in Mexico City. Aeropostal de Mexico had it, with $1 billion worth of cocaine on board. The Forest Service, having let these airplanes out, found itself in a kind of embarrassing position. So they had their lawyers work on it, and notice the last sentence. DOD is the Department of Defense. Apparently, DOD thinks that by having the Forest Service as the intermediary, if any future aircraft are used in drug smuggling, the Forest Service and not DOD will suffer the adverse publicity. They don't care about stopping it, they care about who's going to take the blame. It is possible to nail these people, but you have to know how to approach. The main reason why the CIA deals drugs is for one reason and one reason only. It's not to fund covert operations. The main reason is not to weed out the gene pool, although I will tell you, and I have proven that blacks have been deliberately targeted, but the CIA brings in more drugs than all the African Americans could use in this country. The main reason the CIA deals drugs is to support the U.S. economy. Let's take a look for a second. I don't know if you can read this in the back, but I'll call the names out. We're going to see something that's very unusual here. The National Security Act of 1947 created the CIA. It was written by a man named Clark Clifford, who was a longtime aide to Harry Truman. Okay? Clark Clifford's profession was he was a Wall Street banker and lawyer. Clark Clifford is also the man who brought a bank called BCCI into the United States in the 1980s, a drug money laundering bank that was exposed for laundering drug money. The design for the CIA In other words, the people who told Clifford how to write the act were two brothers, John Foster and Allen Dulles, the Dulles brothers, Duller, and Dulles. John Foster Dulles was Secretary of State to President Dwight Eisenhower. Allen Dulles was the DCI, not from 81 to 87, he was the DCI from, I think, roughly 1953 until about 61 in the Bay of Pigs when John F. Kennedy fired him. You know what their profession was? Wall Street lawyers at the law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, which is today the most powerful law firm on Wall Street. Bill Casey, the man we just saw the memo addressed to. We know he was Ronald Reagan's DCI. What did Bill Casey do for Richard Nixon? He was chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Stanley Sporkin, one of my favorite turkeys, was CIA General Counsel during the 80s. He used to email back and forth with Oliver North. Dear Stanley to Ollie, Stanley to Ollie. It was very funny. Okay? Do you know what he did before he became... No, he was the General Counsel to the SEC. Securities and Exchange Commission, charged with monitoring all securities transactions. David Daugherty, CIA General Counsel after Stanley Sporkin. You know what he does today? The Executive Vice President of the New York Stock Exchange for enforcement. Isn't that great? And then we have a gentleman by the name of A.B. Buzzy Krongard, and we're going to hear a lot about Buzzy Krongard tonight. Buzzy Krongard is currently the CIA Executive Director. The top three positions are DCI, Director of Central Intelligence, DDI, Deputy Director of Intelligence, and Executive Director. Buzzy Krongard was, until 1998, the head of an investment bank called A.B. Brown. A.B. Brown is involved in insider trading connected to September the 11th. He's a Wall Street banker. As a matter of fact, 6 out of 7 of the first deputy directors of intelligence came to CIA from Wall Street. The mission of the CIA is to control money and cash flow for the benefit not of you and me, but for the benefit of the banks and the stock brokerage houses and all of the interests that control U.S. politics. Now, the U.S. economy is in deep trouble. But the level of criminality in this government and in this country has become so overt in the last 2 years that the stink is becoming hard for people to ignore. This is a story from the Associated Press, June 27th, 1999. New York Stock Exchange chief, that's a guy by the name of Dick Grasso, hops on an airplane in New York City and flies to Bogota, Colombia, hops in an armor-plated limousine and drives up to the foothills in the mountains that are occupied by the FARC guerrillas, who occupy a third of Colombia. They tax the cocaine. Everybody in Colombia deals drugs. But what did he ask them to do? He asked the FARC guerrillas to invest their drug profits in Wall Street. There's an AP story right there. He didn't say stop dealing drugs, it's bad for our kids. He said, let us manage your drug money. The FARC said, we think we would rather keep our money in Colombia for the benefit of Colombians. Why should we send it to New York? And what happened a year later was Bill Clinton announced Plan Colombia. And don't get me wrong here, Colombia is on the list of countries where this administration is planning to go to war because there's also oil there. All right. Still laying a foundation, but we're getting ready to move into September 11th. Let's look at a little history of the Bush family. I'm having a lot of fun. Okay. This is from a book called The Unauthorized Biography of George Bush, which is an extremely well-researched book. And everything that they put in here is sourced. If we go to George Herbert Walker Bush's father, Prescott Bush, he was the managing director of a firm called Brown Brothers Harriman during the 30s and 40s. Brown Brothers Harriman financed Adolf Hitler before and during World War II. Brown Brothers Harriman got involved with the Hamburg steamship line. They got involved with a number of companies and front organizations that channeled money directly to Adolf Hitler, and they did not stop that relationship when the war began. As a matter of fact, one particular firm, it was a bank affiliated, it was the Union Bank, affiliated with the Thyssen, that's T-H-Y-S-S-E-N, Steel Trust, managed by Prescott Bush, produced 50.8% of Nazi Germany's pig iron, 41.4% of Nazi Germany's universal plate, 36% of Nazi Germany's heavy plate, 38.5% of Nazi Germany's galvanized steel, 45.5% of Nazi Germany's pipes and tubes, 22% of Nazi Germany's wire, and 35% of Nazi Germany's explosives. It was so egregious and offensive that we find that in 1942, under the Trading with the Enemy Act, the U.S. government took over the Union Banking Corporation, in which Prescott Bush was a director, and they seized the assets. That's our current president's grandfather. Now, we know that our current president's father went out of his way to arm Saddam Hussein. How many people remember Iraqgate? I have an excellent story on that. There's monstrous, wonderful sourcing on the fact that George Herbert Walker Bush created the enemy which he fought in 1991. And so it is currently with Osama bin Laden. Now, how important is drug money? The International Monetary Fund published a report in January of this year showing that $1.5 trillion with a T, a year is laundered through the World Banking System. Of that, according to Le Monde and according to the U.S. Department of Justice, it's very safe to say that $500 billion to $600 billion of that is directly the result of the drug trade. Why is drug cash important? How many people here have a credit card? All right, now I want you to be real truthful when you answer this. When you open your credit card bill every month, what do you look at first? I want everybody to look first at the total balance owing on the card. Raise your hand. How many of you look first at the minimum monthly payment required? How many of you pay your credit cards off in full every month? I'm impressed. The point is that the United States economy, and I was at an economic conference in Moscow in March of this year, has derivatives. Derivatives are anything that's not related to anything of value. It's like stock futures, it's calls, it's puts, it's options. It has a derivatives bubble of $300 trillion. 20 trillion of that alone is connected to J.P. Morgan Chase, which is about ready to go under thanks to Enron. And watch that very closely, okay? Just in March of this year, we had a wonderful piece of evidence come up from Senator Carl Levin's minority report to the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, and it was a report on correspondent banks, and money laundering. Now, this is a story from the Washington Post dated February 5th. It says, inattention and disinterest by U.S. banks in screening the foreign banks they take as clients has allowed rogue foreign banks, not rogue, and their criminal clients to carry on money laundering and other criminal activity in the United States and to benefit from the protections afforded by the safety and the soundness of the U.S. banking industry, said Senator Carl Levin of Michigan. Specifically mentions J.P. Morgan Chase. On the next page, 4,000 offshore banks to launder money into the United States, $1 trillion laundered annually. That's conservative. Money laundered in which the Clinton administration declared a national security threat. Not true. It's a national asset as far as Wall Street is concerned. Carl Levin said $500 billion moved through the U.S. banking system in drug money every year. That's liquid cash. And you want to know how important liquid cash in this world? There's a saying. One of my dear friends and colleagues and mentor, Catherine Austin Fitz, is a former Assistant Secretary of Housing. She was a managing director of Dillon Reed on Wall Street. She says cash flow is everything. And in an economy that's on the verge of a major implosion, without cash flow, the crash is guaranteed. Now, CIA's role is to make sure that as much of that drug money comes through the U.S. economy as possible.
When I was a little girl, I grew up at 48th and Larchwood in West Philadelphia, and the Solari Index was 100%. The Solari Index is the index that I use to describe the well-being of a neighborhood. It's the percent of people in a neighborhood who believe that a child can leave their home, go to the nearest place to buy a popsicle, and come home alone safely. It was unthinkable that a child wasn't safe at 48th and Larchwood in West Philadelphia in the 1950s. The Solari Index was 100%, and the Dow Jones Index was probably about 500. Today, it's reversed. The Dow Jones Index is very high at about 10,000, and the Solari Index is at very low in West Philadelphia and very low throughout the United States. And why is that? It's because one of the ways that we've financed the growth of multinational corporations and big banks and the rise of the Dow Jones is by selling narcotics to our children. It's one of the most profitable businesses in America. About a year ago, I gave a speech called How the Money Works in Organized Crime to a wonderful group of people in Philadelphia. They have a conference every year. They go off into the woods for about 3 days and talk about how they can help our culture, our world, spiritually evolve. So I gave my presentation on how the money works as organized crime, describing what is arguably the biggest, most profitable industry in the United States today. And towards the end, we were discussing the fact that the Department of Justice estimates that the United States is the leader in laundering organized crime profits of about $500 billion to $1 trillion a year. So I asked the audience, what would happen if we stopped being the worldwide leader in laundering $500 billion to $1 trillion a year? And they said, well, you know, if we stopped, our mutual funds would go down in price, the stock market would crash. I said, well, what else would happen? So they said, well, you know, we might have trouble financing the government deficit because, in fact, the people who control 50 years of accumulated profits, that's a lot of capital that we need to finance our deficit. So I said, okay, well, I'll tell you what, let's pretend there's a big red button right up here on the lectern right in front of me. And if you push that button, you can stop all organized crime in America, and you can stop America laundering $500 billion to $1 trillion of organized crime profits every year. Who here will push the button? And out of 100 people, only one person would push the button. And I said, okay, so what you're saying is you want a whole armada of people to sell drugs to your children and grandchildren to keep your mutual funds up and your government checks coming. And they said, yes, that's right. Now, there are many ways to change that. There are many ways to re-engineer our financial system and our resources so that the Solari Index and the Dow Jones can be friends. so that when we get the Solari Index to go up by making sure our neighborhoods are safe for children, the real estate can go up in value, the small businesses go up in value. There are many ways to make the Solari Index and the Dow Jones friends. But before we can do that, before we can have that conversation, we have to face what's happening. We have to face that we are addicted to drug profits, because if we can't face it, God can't fix it.
Okay. This is a copy of the cover sheet of the report. It's on the World Wide Web. If you want to go search for it, you can just look for the report on correspondent banking. Okay, and that's a copy of the report. It's an incredible read. What they don't tell you in there, of course, is that the U.S. economy is dependent upon that drug money, among other things. Now let's go a little further. Gotta love this. If this gentleman down here in the black jacket walks into a bank with a deposit of $10,001, does everybody understand that the bank has to fill out a report and send it to the U.S. Treasury indicating that he might be a money launderer? But did you happen to know that under U.S. laws, there are certain classes of business that are exempt from making currency transaction reports? Included in those are a bank, obviously, a department or agency of the U.S. government. CIA does not have to fill out currency transaction reports. An entity established under the laws of any state, But you come down to this one. A listed entity other than a bank whose common or analogous equity interests are listed on the New York Stock Exchange or American Stock Exchange, or designated as a NASDAQ national market security. If you have a company that trades on Wall Street, you can launder all the money you want to. It's legal. Gee. Now I'm just laying a little groundwork here for you before we get to September 11th. We're getting there. Just last year, a group of companies were called in to meet with Janet Reno, who's not probably the most ethical person that ever lived, and Secretary of State Deputy Treasury Secretary Stuart Eisenstadt. And these companies, Hewlett-Packard, Ford, Sony, General Motors, Whirlpool, General Electric, and Philip Morris, were called in to the Department of Justice for the amount of drug money they were laundering. Basically, the message was, you guys cool it. Okay? It's getting like out of hand. Now, let me ask a question. This gentleman right here, what's your name? Kevin. Kevin is a drug lord. Kevin is the king of all drugs in South America. Okay? All right. And let's say this young lady right down here with the glasses. What's your name? Rhonda. Rhonda is the executive vice president of General Motors for the Southern Hemisphere, or South America. Okay? Kevin, you call up Rhonda one day and you say, I'd like 100 Chevy Suburbans, armor-plated, custom built, at $30,000 each, and I'll pay cash. Rhonda, what are you going to say to that offer? All right. All right. Now, Kevin's got money that he can't spend because it's drug money. But now he's got 100 Chevy Suburbans. But let's say now that, the gentleman with his hand on his chin right there. Yeah, right there. What's your name? No, you. What's your name? Brian. Brian is Jack Welch, the chairman of General Electric. Okay? Now, Kevin, you're really good. Okay? You got $200 million that you got to move. Okay? So you call up Jack Welch's assistant, special accounts assistant. You say, I'd like to open in South America Kevin's Appliances. I'd like to buy $200 million of everything GE has, because I'm going to open this appliance store and I'll pay you cash. Now, Jack Welch at GE, what do you say? Right on. Let's do this deal. Now, by the way, who owns NBC? General Electric. MSNBC, CNBC, all the NBCs. Okay? Now, let's just take a look at that for one quick second. Very quickly, a price-to-earnings ratio, P to E, market capitalization. It's very simple. If you have a company that has 10,000 shares, and each share sells for $10, Did I say 1,000 shares? 1,000 shares, $10. Your market capitalization is $10,000. You multiply the share price by the number of shares. Market capitalization. You divide that by net profits. In other words, what you sell less the cost of doing business. And you come up with the ratio. This is how they value the stock market. Okay, so if you have a company that has a $300 million market capitalization and a $10 million net profit, the price to earnings is 30. The pop is 30. And that's about right. And by the way, the current Dow Jones Industrial Average is overpriced by about 2/3. Okay? Now, if you have this 30-to-1 ratio, if I add another $1 million, my pen went dry. If I add another $1 million and make that 2, what happens to this number? Becomes 60. All right? Now, the lady in red down here, who's looking away from me. Ma'am, what's your name? Karen. Karen owns an orange juice company. Makes the best orange juice in the world. And I owe all of what I'm teaching you now to Catherine Austin Fitz. And she's just she has a wonderful website at solari.com, and we'll put those up before I leave. You make incredible orange juice. Okay, the best orange juice in the world. It's fairly priced. Karen's orange juice, right? Okay. You have $1 million net profit a year. Now, let's say this young lady down here in the glasses with the light green sweater. What's your name? That's you. What's your name? Chris. Chris is the chief executive officer of PepsiCo, which owns a small orange juice company called Tropicana. Okay? You see her company with $1 million in net profit. How much, and your price to earnings is 30-to-1. How much are you willing to pay for that? How much are you willing to pay for her company? Would you pay $29 million?
Yes.
Yeah, because the minute you bought her company for $29 million, your stock value goes up $30 million. How do Wall Street executives get paid? In stock. And you watch very closely the Bush administration's plan for economic recovery. It's all handouts to the corporation, which will go directly to boost their pop, which will put hundreds of millions of dollars in the pockets of executives. Has anybody noticed the Bush administration has not offered one single aid plan for any unemployed airline worker? All right, let's get down and dirty here. Oh, one more thing. Remember that guy John Deutsch that I had fun with? Okay, well, right now he's on the board of directors of Citibank, along with the former executive director of the CIA, who is not on the board, but she's very highly placed executive, Nora Slatkin. John Deutsch, of course, is as crooked as the rest of them. Also on the board of Citibank is a guy named Robert Rubin, former U.S. Secretary of the Treasury. Yes, thank you. He deserves all the hisses he can get. Well, in May of this year, Citibank announced a $12 billion cash purchase of a Mexican bank called Banamex. Second largest bank in Mexico, also a documented, and I mean documented, drug money laundering bank that was exposed in a Mexican newspaper. Roberto Hernandez, this is him, gets a seat on Citibank's board of directors, and yet this is what's going on his property. He owns thousands of acres near Cancun in Mexico. The locals call it the Cocaine Peninsula. There's hundreds of photographs. He lost 2 lawsuits in Mexico. And then my friend Al Giordano, who publishes a great website called www.narconews.com, wrote a great story about the Mexican paper stories, and Hernandez sued Giordano in New York, and he's going to lose that lawsuit, by the way. Al Giordano's a brave journalist. But the point I'm making with this is that the criminality had gotten so out of hand by May of this year that Citibank would openly buy a known drug money laundering bank and put the drug money launderer on its board of directors. That's the need for drug cash in the U.S. economy right now. By the way, Citibank's record of involvement in drug money laundering is extremely well documented in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. It laundered some, I think, $300 or $400 million for Raul Salinas de Gortari, the brother of the former Mexican president. Now let's go to some other things that are going on in the economy so that we set you up to understand what's going on around September the 11th. The U.S. economy is being looted. Anybody here remember the savings and loan scandal? You know, the gang that's in the White House is the same gang that brought us the savings and loan scandal? That took $500 billion out of your pockets. Well, here's some new developments in the government. And by the way, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. Bill Clinton's a sleazebag too. Okay? That so-called liberal put almost a million nonviolent drug offenders in prison to boost the shares of companies like Corrections Corporation of America and Wackenhut. He destroyed many of the welfare laws, and one is not better than the other. But notice this: HUD loses, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, $59 billion. When was the last time you lost $59 billion? This was from testimony in Congress by Susan Gaffney, Inspector General of HUD. And you know what HUD said they did when they couldn't figure out where the money went? We made an adjustment in our checkbook. Where's that money going? You'll find out before we're through. Now, if you thought that was bad, the Defense Department cannot account for $1.1 trillion that seems to have vanished within the tangled system of financial accounting put in place by private contractors. You know who the private contractors are? Lockheed Martin and DynCorp. Okay? HUD. Oh, I dropped a microphone. I have more microphones on me than the FBI has in my living room. This is from a very great reporter, a very courageous woman who had served on Capitol Hill for many years and became an investigative reporter named Kelly O'Meara, who writes for the Washington Times Insight magazine. I know it's owned by Moon, but Kelly does fabulous work, and she's written a great piece on civil rights after the September 11th attack. The point is that $4.4 trillion in adjustments to the Pentagon books had to be cooked to compile the required financial statements, and that $1.1 trillion of that amount could not be supported by any reliable information. All right, now, there's one thing I got to do before we get to September the 11th and what's happening since. It's easy to say that this is a war about oil, and you're going to know more about it than you did when you came in here, when you leave. The entire world economy is on the brink of a major collapse. 2 days before the attacks on the World Trade Center, I issued an emergency bulletin to all of my subscribers. And by the way, there's a table over here, and those of you who would like to subscribe, we have the information there for you. I'll put a website up. We also have videotapes of a lecture on Wall Street's War for Drug Money, which is like 2 hours on what I did with the economy that I gave at the USC School of International Relations last December. And we have those tapes over there. I think Chris Milligan's over there somewhere. Chris, wherever you are. But I issued a bulletin saying that we were on the brink of an economic collapse that would make 1929 look like a picnic. And in the 3 weeks prior to the attacks, the Dow had dropped almost 900 points. Now, what we have seen since then, and you must understand this clearly, is that the Dow's so-called resurrection to close to 10,000 points is strictly the result of a massive infusion of cash from the U.S. Treasury, which is your cash, which is being given to the corporate executives and not to the people who have been laid off. And every time you see the Dow go up, you'd better believe that another 5,000, 10,000 people have lost their jobs.
We are also in a global financial crisis that began in 1998 with the collapse of the bond markets and hedge fund derivatives, the money laundering investigations, and the mega mergers in the financial industry. The war buildup after September 11th is now shifting resources from domestic needs to the defense establishment. This fulfills a Bush-Cheney campaign promise to boost defense spending.
But it is not sustainable for a number of reasons. And then this brings us into the issue of oil briefly, and we'll get into this more later. and basically is that oil production in the world is peaking. The last untapped major oil fields in the world are in two places, actually. First, Central Asia, and we'll get into that in depth. And second, guess where? In Colombia. Okay? And this is now a war, and this is now a moment in human history when the age of oil is nearing its end, because world population and demand will exceed production sometime within roughly the next 10 years. And we're going to get into that for why. But now let's go back into the warnings about September the 11th. And I didn't do a lot of this, and we have time. Osama bin Laden is of course a Saudi Arabian by birth. His family is exceptionally wealthy. They own not only major construction companies, but they are heavy investors in high technology stocks like Nortel. They have a piece of Pepsi, I think, and Coca-Cola. They're into everything. They're very wealthy. In 1976, Osama's older brother Salim bin Laden hired a man in Texas by the name of Jim Bath, who has CIA connections, to handle all the investments in the United States for the bin Laden family. Jim Bath also happens to be a personal, almost lifelong friend and former Air National Guard pilot with George W. Bush. And immediately after Jim Bath made the arrangements to took over the bin Laden family's finances, Jim Bath made a $50,000 investment in George W. Bush's first company, Arbusto Energy. The connections between the Bushes and the bin Ladens become much more clear as you move forward, and we have reported this in From the Wilderness. Again, I was using stories, and you'll see this. When George Herbert Walker Bush made trips to Saudi Arabia in 1998 and 2000 to meet with the Saudi royal family and to meet with the bin Laden family, which he finally acknowledged, along with former British Prime Minister John Major, on behalf of a company called the Carlyle Group, which is the 11th largest defense contractor in the company, in the country. Carlyle Group is a privately owned corporation. That means they do not have to report their ownership or financial activities to the SEC. Yet they provide all kinds of the highest technology equipment to the U.S. Pentagon. And Carlyle, of course, has made several, probably $1 billion, and will as a result of this war. In that context, Osama bin Laden went to Afghanistan in 1979, 1980, maybe the early 80s, to fight the Russians, and he was supported by the CIA. And it's interesting to note that when the Russians invaded Afghanistan, 0%, and this is from Professor Alfred McCoy of the University of Wisconsin, who's also one of my subscribers, in a great book called The Politics of Heroin, 0% of the U.S. consumption of heroin came from Pakistan, Afghanistan before the Russian invasion. By 1985, 86, 40% of the heroin in the United States came from that region, all controlled by the Central Intelligence Agency. And Osama bin Laden came up under a guy named Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who ran 6 heroin labs, all protected by the CIA and controlled by the agency. He has been a CIA asset for a long period of time. We'll see more about that. He is a CIA creation. Now we come to September 11th, and we're going to go into a timeline here, and I have written several stories, and I was on the radio here with Sheila Hamilton at KPAM just a few days after the attacks, and I was saying the U.S. government knew these attacks were going to take place and did not stop them. And I keep building to that evidence, but I'm going to show you a couple of things now. Not by any means all of the evidence that I have of foreknowledge, but just a couple of telling points. Israeli security issued urgent warning to CIA of large-scale terror attacks. And this is a long story saying that the Israeli Mossad knew that the attacks were going to take place. They knew that the World Trade Center were the targets. This is from the British paper The Telegraph. Two senior experts with Mossad were sent to Washington in August to alert the CIA and so on and so forth. This is just one of probably 24 examples that I have that are absolutely specific. Now, bear in mind that if what I'm showing you is known overtly through the media, how much more does our $30 billion intelligence community know? There's a recurring theme out there that maybe the Israelis did this. You hear that in some right-wing circles. Horsepucky. They didn't do it. They were warning the U.S. hand over fist, and the U.S. did not listen because it needed the attacks. And you will be convinced of that. But here's one of the most telling pieces of evidence that I found. We reviewed the list of former tenants of the World Trade Center at the online Wall Street Journal site, and there's the website. It is an alphabetical list of tenants. Scroll to the very bottom and notice the moving date for the office of Zim American Israeli Shipping to Norfolk, Virginia. They were in the World Trade Center. They must have had Mossad's input because they vacated 1 week before September the 11th, and they broke their lease. The Israelis didn't pull the attack, but they were smart enough to get their people out of the way. How come our government didn't do the same thing for us? Now we're getting into the heart of September the 11th. I picked up this document just a few days after the attacks, September 23rd. And it's from the Herzliya Institute for Counterterrorism. It is an Israeli counterterrorist think tank. Of course it's connected with the Mossad. And what they detailed, this is from the October 15th issue of From the Wilderness. Between September 6th and 7th, the Chicago Board of Options Exchange saw purchases of 4,744 put options on United Airlines and only 396 call options. A put option is basically a bet that the stock price is going to go down. It's a contract that's entered into that's irrevocable. And let's say the gentleman in the suspenders, I do a put option deal with you to sell shares at $100 in 2 weeks, 4 months. 4 months is the standard, but you can write the contract for anything you want. And he's committed now to buy the shares for $100. Well, if I know that the attacks are going to take place, I don't have to deliver the shares until the contract matures. So if I know the stock is going to crash, he enters into a put agreement with me, agrees to buy the shares at $100. The next day the World Trade Center attacks happen. The stocks are selling for $20. I go buy the shares for $20, and he has to buy them for $100. That's how a put option works. That's the short version, okay? So we saw 4,744 put options on United Airlines, but only 396 call options. On September the 10th, 4,516 put options, same deal, were placed on American Airlines, bought on the Chicago Exchange, compared to only 748 calls. There were no other similar trades on any other airlines. And this level of put options was like 600 to 1,200% above normal for United and American Airlines. Now, just these trades alone, there were also put options placed on Merrill Lynch, which had 22 floors. Morgan Stanley had 22 floors, and Merrill Lynch had an offices near. Both were heavily impacted. Heavy put options there, heavy put options on reinsurance companies, Munich Reinsurance, the largest in the world, AXA Reinsurance in France, which owned 25% of American. Totally out of whack. Absolutely spiking. There's another newsletter that says very clearly, by a guy by the name of Phil Erlanger, and this is his newsletter, that the insider trading may have cost $1 billion. Now just these ones that were identified, produced only $2.5 million in instant profits for somebody who knew the attacks were going to take place. Nobody claimed the profits. The San Francisco Chronicle caught it shortly thereafter, and nobody has claimed them since. And we don't know who made the trades. But what did the Herzliya Institute for Counterterrorism tell us? It told us that the United Airlines put options were placed through the firm A.B. Brown. Do you remember A.B. Brown? A.B. Brown was the firm headed until 1998 by A.B. Buzzy Krongard, who is now the executive director of the Central Intelligence Agency. A.B. Brown was sold in 97 to Bankers Trust, then to Deutsche Bank, I think in 98 or 99. It was an offshoot of Deutsche Bank. Now, one thing that I know, that I have written heavily about, is that the CIA, the Mossad, and major intelligence services track all stock trading in real time. On my website, you'll see stories about Promise software, and it's very long to go into, but it's a very sophisticated software. I'm going to write the website for you. It's a very sophisticated software that's been made with artificial intelligence and is capable of integrating wide numbers of databases in different languages. You'll find this on my website at www.copvcia.com. Now, I know that CIA and Mossad track stock trades in real time, so if all these put options were placed on American and United, do you think that should have triggered some alarm inside the Central Intelligence Agency? But instead we find that the trades were placed through a firm that was once owned, managed by the guy who was the number 3 at CIA. These are just pieces of evidence now. I'm building the case. Now, again, we're building up some history here. In January of this year, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda destroyed the entire opium crop in Afghanistan. It's been verified by the United Nations, by the Drug Enforcement Administration, by ABC News, by BBC, who put people on the ground. Afghanistan had been the world's largest producer of opium, producing 70% of the world's heroin through the year 2000. In January, they destroyed their crop. Part of it was a price support. They had overproduced the year before, part of it, and they sold from their stockpiles. But there are no opium crops in Afghanistan right now. They've all been planted, of course, since the Bush administration and the CIA have lifted the ban, and everybody can go back to work and the CIA can move the heroin again.
Something that is not being reported in the U.S. press, but is getting quite wide coverage in England and in Europe. And that is that the result of our backing the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan this year is to restore a heroin flow which would otherwise have been halved or more in the world, because the Taliban not only announced that they were going to outlaw planting, but their decree worked. There was no Taliban opium planted last year, and that meant a reduction of 90% in the amount of opium coming out of Afghanistan, and the 10% that was left represented a radical increase in the areas under Northern Alliance control. Now, if we had not gone into Afghanistan, this would have been the most effective reduction in the flow of heroin in the world since the DEA was created 30 years ago. But by going into Afghanistan, backing the Northern Alliance, we've now chased the Taliban out, and in all kinds of provinces where the farmers had started to plant wheat, they're now plowing up their fields and putting in opium instead. And the global drug authorities at the UN expect that we're going to go back to the record flow of opium that we've seen in the last couple of years.
But we heard right after the attacks on September 11th, Tony Blair saying, "We will bomb the poppy fields." Well, there are no poppy fields. They destroyed their crops. I was in Moscow, Russia in March of this year, and I found out that Uzbekistan, and we're going to get to Uzbekistan in a minute, was awash in a sea of poppies. And what did I find also was that companies like Southern Air Transport, Evergreen, and other CIA-connected affiliates had been flying into and out of Tashkent. The CIA had been setting up operations. There were proprietary companies all over the place in Uzbekistan. So now we have the destruction of an opium crop, which does what? It takes cash out of the world's banking system. In conjunction with a stock market bubble, in conjunction with world oil prices or world oil production diminishing, and a huge bubble on Wall Street. Now we come to, this is just from recently, of course. This is from the October 5th. Afghan rebels, that's the Northern Alliance, our good friends. The Northern Alliance, who actually dominate the opium trade from the north of Afghanistan. Okay, now we've seen the recent stories saying that the poppy farmers are absolutely rejoicing because they've gone back to planting. So now we come back to the oil and drugs. There's an old saying, God equals gold, oil, and drugs. Testimony from February 12, 1998 in Washington, D.C. before the House International Relations Committee by John Maresca, Vice President of International Relations for UNICAL, which had been planning to build a pipeline for some time from the Central Asian oil fields of Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, all the stands, across Afghanistan down to the Pakistani coast. It's a distance of about 1,500 miles. To a terminal where U.S. tankers would take the oil and gas and ship it to China and Japan, the largest emerging markets in the world. China's in the middle of a huge oil crisis, and the U.S. Wall Street is pouring money into China hand over fist. And he says in this, construction cannot begin construction until an internationally recognized Afghanistani government is in place. A recent study for the World Bank states that the proposed pipeline for Central Asia across Afghanistan and Pakistan to the Arabian Sea would provide more favorable netbacks, that's money in your pocket, folks, to oil producers. That's his testimony. Now, UNICAL put the pipeline on hold in 1999. They also hired a guy named Henry Kissinger to consult for them, which explains why Afghanistan has never been listed as a sponsoring terrorist nation. Isn't that strange? The head of all the terrorists in the world, and the biggest country, has never been listed? Okay, U.S. companies to invest in Pakistan oil and gas sectors. This is from a Pakistani newspaper, the Frontier Post. The date is, what is the date? October 10th. And what this says, now October the 10th is after we've gone to war, after the attacks on World Trade Center, after we know, is anybody surprised at how quickly we kind of won in Afghanistan? Okay. Well, the war's been planned for 4 years, and I'm saving the best for last, but the U.S. ambassador to Pakistan met with the Pakistani oil minister and briefed the ambassador on the proposed Turkmenistan-Afghanistan Pakistan gas pipeline, and said that this project opens up new avenues of multidimensional regional cooperation, particularly in view of the recent geopolitical developments in the region. Gee, the pipeline that was blocked is now back on full tilt just days after we started the bombing. Suspicious. Okay, maybe I haven't convinced you of everything, but we're just getting warmed up now. This is how Afghanistan went unlisted as a terrorist sponsor. This is the story that I found, and it says right here, UNICAL hired former State Department insiders, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, former Special U.S. Ambassador John, the guy was also, I didn't see that, the UNICAL guy was also a special ambassador, and Robert Oakley, a former U.S. ambassador to Pakistan. You're going to love where Henry Kissinger turns up on this, by the way. All right. This is one other thing about Kissinger. Chinese oil firm picks Kissinger as advisor. This is from November 4th, thank you. The Chinese national offshore oil company has hired Henry Kissinger to head its foreign advisory board. Now, Kissinger's got the Pakistan end and he's got the China end of this oil pipeline. Who does Henry Kissinger front for?
Rockefeller.
Very good. David Rockefeller. Who's that? Zbig Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski was counselor for strategic and international studies, professor of American foreign policy at Johns Hopkins, national security advisor to President Jimmy Carter, trustee and founder of the Trilateral Commission, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, international advisor to several major corporations, associate of Henry Kissinger, also worked for Ronald Reagan in intelligence capacities. Co-chairman of the Bush National Security Advisory Task Force in 1988. What a guy. Zbig. Now, if you want to get really, 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 really angry, go buy this book. It's called The Grand Chessboard: American Primacy and Its Geostrategic Objectives, written by Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1997. I'm going to read you some quotes from that book. Page XII, it's the very first words in the book. The last decades of the 20th century has witnessed a tectonic shift in world affairs. For the first time ever, a non-Eurasian power has emerged not only as a key arbiter of Eurasian power relations, but also as the world's paramount power. The defeat and collapse of the Soviet Union was the final step in the rapid ascendance of a Western Hemisphere power, the United States as the sole and indeed the first truly global superpower. Page XII, it's in the preface. But in the meantime, he says, it is imperative that no Eurasian challenger, Eurasia is everything in between roughly east of Germany all the way to the Pacific Ocean, south through the Indian subcontinent, and includes the Middle East. It's imperative that no Eurasian challenger, by that he means Russia or China, emerges capable of dominating Eurasia and thus of also challenging America. The formulation of a comprehensive and integrated Eurasian geostrategy is therefore the purpose of this book, Geostrategy, Eurasia. The attitude of the American public toward the external projection of American power has been much more ambivalent. The public supported America's engagement in World War II largely because of the shock effect of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Gets worse. For America, the chief geopolitical prize is Eurasia. Now a non-Eurasian power, that's us, is preeminent in Eurasia, and America's global primacy, isn't that arrogant? America's global primacy is directly dependent on how long and how effectively its preponderance on the Eurasian continent is sustained. What he's saying is that if the U.S. wants to stay top dog, we have to control Eurasia. America's withdrawal from the world, or because of the sudden emergence of a successful rival, would produce massive international stability. It would prompt global anarchy. You know what he's saying there? Yeah, a little global anarchy would probably be a damn good thing right now. What he's saying there is, if we don't control the world by whatever means necessary, the world's going to be miserable. He didn't ask my opinion. Did he ask yours? Okay. In that context, how America manages Eurasia, do we manage people around the world? Is that our job? Is critical. Eurasia is the globe's largest continent and is geopolitically axial. A power that dominates Eurasia would control two of the world's three most advanced and economically productive regions. A mere glance at the map also suggests that control over Eurasia would almost automatically entail Africa's subordination, rendering the Western Hemisphere and Oceania, that's Australia for all of you non-academics, geopolitically peripheral to the world's central continent. About 75% of the world's people live in Eurasia, and most of the world's physical wealth is there as well, both in its enterprises and underneath its soil. Eurasia accounts for 60% of the world's GNP and three-fourths of the world's known energy resources. Two basic steps are thus required. First, to identify the geostrategically dynamic Eurasian states that have the power to cause a potentially important shift in the international distribution of power, and to decipher the central external goals of their respective political elites and the likely consequences of their seeking to attain them. Second, to formulate specific U.S. policies to offset, co-opt, and/or control the above. The man is talking about co-opting, controlling, managing, subverting nations and peoples and economies. To put it in a terminology that harkens back to the more brutal age of ancient empires, the three grand imperatives of imperial, listen to this, of imperial geostrategy are to prevent collusion and maintain security dependence among the vassals, to keep tributaries pliant and protected, and to keep the barbarians from coming together. That's on page 40. I'm telling you, you got to buy the book. Now we get really serious. On page 95, Uzbekistan, with its much more ethnically homogeneous population of approximately 25 million and its leaders emphasizing the country's historic glories, has become increasingly assertive in affirming the region's new post-colonial status. He saw the first step in this as diminishing the ability of Russia to reassert the dream of the Soviet Union. All the stands in Central Asia were once part of the Soviet Union. The borders were drawn arbitrarily by Lenin and Stalin. And he saw one of the most important steps was to prevent Russia from asserting any control in the region, which we did. You know how we did it? Over the last decade, thanks to Goldman Sachs, the Harvard Endowment, the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve, the World Bank, we looted $300 billion out of the Russian economy. $300 billion. I was there. The Russian population was, 164 million at the fall of the Soviet Union. The population of Russia is today 145 million. In another 10 years, it will be 130 million. The average life expectancy of a male in Russia has dropped to 48 years. Thanks to the economic devastation, the ruin we visited on their economy, it was a deliberate plan to weaken Russia so that it couldn't challenge our move into Eurasia a decade later. It helps if you see this on the map. Okay? Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and China. Now, the proposed oil route is from here to here, 1,500 miles. China can't build it because it's 5,000 miles, and they don't have the technology to build it. We do, thanks to a company named Halliburton, which was chaired with the CEO was Dick Cheney, right? Okay, they're probably going to build the pipeline. Okay, so now that you see this relationship, what he's saying is you build a block starting with Islamic fundamentalism, which we've supported and created, to keep Russia from moving south to reassert control, but then you build up these countries so that they're so powerful, and with a weakened Russia, Russia can't make a move to control, and all the oil reserves are right in here. Okay? And we have effectively made China dependent upon our technology because they need the oil desperately. Now, Uzbekistan, nationally the most vital and the most populous of the Central Asian states, represents the major obstacle to any renewed Russian control over the region. Its dependence is critical to the survival of other Central Asian states and is the least vulnerable to Russian pressures. Where was the first place that President Bush announced we were sending troops after the attacks on September 11th? We were already there. We'd been training Uzbeki troops for more than 5 years. referring to an area he calls the Eurasian Balkans in a 1997 map in which he circled the exact location. Now remember, this is a book written 4 years ago. And I'm going to show you a map where Zbigniew Brzezinski said the next world conflict was going to take place. Afghanistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. This is where he said 4 years ago the United States, in order to sustain its precarious, that's my words, economy, would have to control that to maintain its role as the global superpower and to become the world's only superpower. In effect, the ruling nation of the world. That's his map from 4 years ago. Referring to an area he calls the Eurasian Balkans and a 97 map in which he circled the exact location of the current conflict, describing it as the central region of pending conflict for world dominance, Brzezinski writes, moreover, the Central Asian republics are of importance from the standpoint of security and historical ambitions to at least 3 of their most immediate and more powerful neighbors, namely Russia, Turkey, and Iran, with China also signaling an increasing geopolitical interest in the region. And he really lets his hair down. More important as a potential economic prize, an enormous concentration of natural gas and oil reserves is located in the region in addition to important minerals including gold. Didn't know about the gold, did you? The world's energy consumption is bound to vastly increase over the next 2 or 3 decades. Estimates by the U.S. Department of Energy anticipate that world demand will rise by more than 50% between 1993 and 2015, with the most significant increase in consumption occurring in the Far East, China. The momentum of Asia's economic development is already generating massive pressures for the exploration and exploitation of new sources of energy in the Central Asian region, and the Caspian Sea basin are known to contain reserves of natural gas and oil that dwarf those of Kuwait, the Gulf of Mexico, and the North Sea. Once pipelines to the area have been developed, Turkmenistan's truly vast natural gas reserves augur a prosperous future. He's talking about the pipelines. Without sustained and directed American involvement, before long, the forces of global disorder. Global disorder? You mean democracy? Global disorder could come to dominate the world scene, and the possibility of such a fragmentation is inherent in the geopolitical tensions not only of today's Eurasia, but of the world more generally. The most immediate task is to make certain that no state or combination of states gains the capacity to expel the United States from Eurasia, or even to diminish significantly its decisive arbitration role. In the long run, global politics are bound to become increasingly uncongenial to the concentration of hegemonic power in the hands of a single state. Hence, America is not only the first as well as the only truly global superpower, but is also likely to be the very last. And what does he say that's going to happen? He says that the United States will fold into a one-world government in which all nations will cease to exist, run by corporations. I'm paraphrasing it. Now, hold your breath. Very last pages in the book. Moreover, as America becomes an increasingly multicultural society, it may find it more difficult to fashion a consensus on foreign policy issues except in the circumstance of a truly massive and widely perceived direct external threat. Read it again, she said. Maybe I should read this with a German accent. Wait a minute. Moreover, as America becomes an increasingly multicultural society, it may find it more difficult to fashion a consensus on foreign policy issues, except in the circumstance of a truly massive and widely perceived direct external threat. want you to know that the Third Reich did not lose the Second World War. It just changed venues. Now we're going to close with a summation. And you all are still with me. Nobody's fallen over in their chairs, right? Can I have a minute to take a hit off my Pepsi here? All right. Now I'm going to run you through a timeline, which is what a detective would do for a prosecutor. I'm going to run you through a series of events with some information that's absolutely going to curl your socks. Or something. And let's start with some of this we've covered. 1998 and 2000, former President George Bush travels to Saudi Arabia on behalf of the Carlyle Group, the 11th largest defense contractor. While there, he meets privately with the Saudi royal family and the bin Laden family. Source, Wall Street Journal, September 27th. Also from The Wilderness, that's my newsletter, The Best Enemies Money Can Buy. And I hope some of you folks are going to subscribe tonight. Chris, wherever you are, raise your hand. January 2001, the Bush administration orders the FBI and intelligence agencies to back off investigations involving the bin Laden family, including two of Osama bin Laden's relatives, Abdullah and Omar bin Laden. There goes the black sheep theory, who were living, guess where? In Falls Church, Virginia, right next to CIA headquarters. This followed previous orders dating back to 1996, that's under Bill Clinton, frustrating efforts to investigate the bin Laden family. Source, BBC Newsnight correspondent Greg Palast. And on the TV broadcast, he actually held up an FBI national security report showing that the Bureau had been ordered to leave the bin Ladens alone. By the way, this is just for your edification. This is a copy of the BBC report showing that the Bush administration ordered the FBI to stop investigating the bin Laden family in January, right after taking office. February 13th, UPI terrorism correspondent Richard Sale, while covering a trial of bin Laden's al-Qaeda followers, reports that the National Security Agency has broken bin Laden's encrypted communications. They introduced the evidence into court. The NSA had broken his secure communications. Even if this indicates that bin Laden changed systems in February, it does not mesh with the fact that the government insists that the planning for the September 11th attacks took years. May 2001, Secretary of State Colin Powell gives $43 million in aid to the Taliban. Why? Good question. Purportedly to assist hungry farmers who are starving since the destruction of their opium crop. And in January on the orders of the Taliban. Source, the Los Angeles Times, May 22.
In the year 2000, the UN says that there were 3,276 tons of opium produced in Afghanistan. In 2001, they estimate that the total crop was 185 tons. That's a reduction of 94%. Now, in the Northern Alliance areas, there was an increase. There were two provinces that one place it grew by, I think, 185%, almost doubled, and another it increased tenfold. But even so, the Northern Alliance provinces, with their huge increase, they were 90% of this year's crop, but 90% of 185 tons is not enough to offset. There was a net loss of 3,100 tons of opium, and that would have been such a fantastic improvement in the world opium scene. But now that they are replanting fields all over Afghanistan with opium, that possible victory we could have seen over drugs is being wiped out as a result of the U.S. intervention.
May 2001, Deputy Secretary of State, one of my favorite guys in the whole world, Richard Armitage, a former Navy SEAL who used to go on kill missions in Laos and Cambodia, who has been dealing drugs for most of his adult life, who was involved in Iran-Contra and death squads, and who has been around this world as a covert operative, goes to India at the same time while the DCI, the CIA director George Tenet, travels to Pakistan. Armitage is the cover. It's a publicized tour. Tenet makes a quiet stop to Pakistan where he spends a long time with General Pervez Musharraf, our great ally in Pakistan. Pakistan's the largest supporter of terrorism in the world, by the way. Armitage has deep intelligence connections, but Tenet spends hours, and it would be reasonable to assume, wouldn't you agree, that the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, if he's meeting with the president of Pakistan, would also meet with the head of Pakistani intelligence? Wouldn't that make sense to you? Remember, the head of Pakistani intelligence has to be approved by the CIA by treaty. The guy's name is Lieutenant General Mahmood Ahmad. Source, the Indian Sapra News Agency, May 22nd. I have copies of all of these. My $1,000 is safe. June 2001. German intelligence, the BND, the Bundesnachrichtendienst, warns the CIA and Israel that Middle Eastern terrorists are planning to hijack commercial aircraft to use as weapons to attack important symbols of American and Israeli culture. Source, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, that's a great newspaper in Germany, September 14th. July 2001. 3 American officials, Tom Simmons, former U.S. ambassador to Pakistan, Carl Inderfurth, former Assistant Secretary of State, Lee Coldren, former State Department expert on South Asia, meet with Pakistani and Russian intelligence officers in Berlin and tell them that the U.S. is planning military strikes against Afghanistan in October. A French book, La Vérité Interdite, discloses that Taliban representatives often sat in on the meetings. U.S. is going to the Taliban, now get this, and says, we're going to bomb you to smithereens in October. Could we call that provocation? Historically, there is a model. Franklin Roosevelt shut off the Japanese from oil supplies in the late 30s and early 40s to provoke them into attacking Pearl Harbor. Sources, The Guardian, September 22nd, the BBC, September 18th, and the Interpress News Service in Pakistan, November 16th. Summer 2001, according to a September 26th story in Britain's The Guardian, correspondent David Lee reported that U.S. Department of Defense official Jeffrey Starr visited Tajikistan in January. The Guardian's Felicity Lawrence established that U.S. Rangers were training special troops in Kyrgyzstan at that time. And there were unconfirmed reports that Tajik and Uzbek special troops were training in Alaska and Montana. Summer 2001, Pakistani ISI chief General Mahmoud, remember the guy I talked about, the guy that has to be approved by the CIA director by treaty? You're going to love this. Pakistani ISI chief General Mahmoud orders an aide to wire transfer $100,000 to Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker. Who was, according to the FBI, the lead terrorist in the suicide hijackings. Mahmoud recently resigned after the transfer was disclosed in India and confirmed by the FBI. Source, The Times of India, October 11th. Our allies wiring $100,000 to the lead hijacker before the attacks. Summer 2001, an Iranian man phones the U.S. law enforcement to warn of an imminent attack on the World Trade Center in the week of September the 9th. World Trade Center, September the 9th. German police confirm the calls but state the U.S. Secret Service would not reveal any information. I got this from the German news agency Online, i.e. September 14th, 2001. August 2001. The FBI arrests an Islamic militant linked to bin Laden in Boston. French intelligence sources confirm the man is a key member of bin Laden's network, and the FBI learns that he has been taking flying lessons in Boston. At the time of his arrest in Boston, where 2 of the planes are hijacked, the man is in possession of technical information on Boeing aircraft and flight manuals. Reuters, September 13th. Summer 2001, Russian intelligence notifies the CIA that 25 terrorist pilots have been specifically training for suicide missions. This is reported in the Russian press and I have one of my sources, I have several sources who are former CIA officers, translated the article for me. July 4th through 14th, Osama bin Laden receives treatments for kidney disease at the American hospital in Dubai and meets with a CIA official who returns to CIA headquarters on July 15th. This is the guy who blew up the coal and the embassies that Bill Clinton signed an order it's okay to execute. He gets treatment at an American hospital in Dubai and flies out on a private plane. Oliver North in the 80s, Oliver North is one of my least favorite people, but he sent Navy planes to track down terrorists on the Achille Lauro. The moment bin Laden entered international airspace, he would have been fair game. The source for this story is Le Figaro, French newspaper, October 31st. Now, I got to throw in a caveat here. Le Figaro is owned by the Carlyle Group. These guys can't control everybody, okay? And they can't control reporters. Le Figaro was emphatic that they had confirmed the details of the story. The CIA immediately came out with an adamant denial, but the CIA never lies. So did some people at the hospital. But you don't have to take the story as all or everything. But Le Figaro has not retracted the story. August 2001, Russian President Vladimir Putin orders Russian intelligence to warn the U.S. government in the strongest possible terms of imminent attacks on airports and government buildings. I watched it on MSNBC on September the 15th. August, September 2001, the Dow Jones Industrial Average drops nearly 900 points in the 3 weeks prior to the attack. A major stock market crash is imminent. September 3 through 10. MSNBC reports on September 16th that a caller to the Cayman Islands radio talk show gave several warnings of an imminent attack on the U.S. by bin Laden in the week prior to 9/11. These are just some of the advance warning bits that we have. Now, September 1 through 10. Some 25,000 British troops, the largest British naval armada since the Falkland Island War. It's not Essential Harvest, it's called Swift Sword. An operation in the planning for 4 years. Are set to deploy to Oman in the week before the September 11th attacks. It takes years to plan this kind of a deployment. And yet the British government had been planning it for 4 years. After the attack on the 11th, there was a slight hiccup. They waited, but the deployment went ahead as scheduled, supposedly to support the U.S. But you have to understand, I don't know how many veterans we have in this room, but you have to understand that it takes months and months and months to deploy these kinds of personnel, yet they're already set to go to Oman. At the same time, 2 U.S. aircraft carrier battle groups happen to be rendezvousing off the Pakistani coast. This is not a normal deployment. The Pakistani coast is not the Persian Gulf, it's the Arabian Sea. Yet we have 2 aircraft carrier battle groups off the Pakistani coast, and at the same time, some 17,000 U.S. troops join more than 23,000 NATO troops for Operation Bright Star in Egypt. Fully deployed, combat ready, locked and loaded. All before September the 11th. Is this suspicious? I think so. September 6th through 7th, we have the 4,744 put options on United Airlines, CIA monitoring stock trading in real time. September 10th, 4,500 put options are purchased on American. September 6th through the 11th, no other airlines show any similar trading patterns to those experienced by UAL and American. The put option purchases on both airlines were 600% above normal. September 6th through 10th, put options on Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, AXA Reinsurance, and Munich Re. It has been documented, and I talked about this through the Promise software, that intelligence agencies routinely track the stock trading. And I'll tell you what I think, an opinion here, happened, is that someone at CIA told the head of A.B. Brown, and the head of A.B. Brown decided to make himself a little money on the side, and he got caught because the stock market was shut down because, well, we'll come to that in a second. General Mahmoud of the ISI, the guy that wired $100,000 to Mohammed Atta, the guy that had to be approved by the CIA, happened to be in Washington on September the 11th. He had arrived the week before. I think he was discussing war plans. That's from MSNBC. September the 11th, for 35 minutes from 8:15 a.m. until 9:05 a.m., with it widely known to the FAA and the military that 4 planes had been simultaneously hijacked and taken off course. No one notifies the President of the United States. It is not until 9:30 that any Air Force planes are scrambled to intercept, but by then it is too late. This means that the National Command Authority waited for 75 minutes before scrambling aircraft, even though it was known that 4 simultaneous hijackings had occurred, an event that has never happened in history. Sources: CNN, ABC, MSNBC, the Los Angeles Times, and the New York Times. And if you go to my website, you will see the beginning of a fabulous series of articles out of Canada by 2 writers, Ilarion Bykov and Jared Israel. Their website is The Emperor's New Clothes. You can find all the links from my website, all these other sites. They've established clearly, using documents that have now been taken down off of U.S. Air Force websites, that it is a matter of routine policy on the FAA and the U.S. Air Force to scramble a jet the instant any airliner is hijacked without waiting for an order from the President.
What does that mean, scramble? I don't know, sorry.
You put them up in the air and make them go intercept the jet, not shoot it down, but you put a fighter aircraft in the airspace with the hijacked airliner. It's FAA routine procedure. It doesn't require an order from the President of the United States. Remember Payne Stewart? Remember his airplane? Remember it went off course? It was off course for no more than 10 minutes, and fighter jets had been scrambled to fly along beside it. Now, if we have 4 simultaneous hijackings, why were no planes scrambled to intercept those planes for 75 minutes? The Andrews Air Force Base website has taken down information saying that it maintained a ready response scramble force to protect the skies over Washington, D.C. A presidential order is not necessary to intercept an aircraft. It is necessary to shoot down an aircraft. And yet the government has committed a lot of lies. Dick Cheney has lied about U.S. Air Force response. I used to work outside Andrews Air Force Base. I saw F-16s, F-18s, F-15s taken off all the time.
So they took down that site?
They have changed the site. It has been archived and saved. If you go to my website, go to the articles, you can get links to the way it used to read. Okay? All right. September 13th. China is admitted to the World Trade Organization after 15 years of unsuccessful attempts. The vote was taken. It was just ratified about a week ago, but that was the vote. Nobody noticed. September 15th, the New York Times reports that Mayo Shattuck III, the head of A.B. Brown in the United States, resigned effective immediately without explanation. The insider trading, September 15th was the first day that the stock market opened after the attacks. September 29th, the San Francisco Chronicle reports that 2.5 million in put options on American Airlines and UAL are unclaimed. This is the result of the suspension in trading. Nobody showed up to claim it. October 10th, the Pakistani newspaper Frontier Post reports that Ambassador Wendy Chamberlain has called on the Pakistani oil minister. The pipeline is now a go. Mid-October 2001, the Dow Jones is back up near 10,000 as a result of the massive looting, outpouring of cash. Gonna love this one. One of my dearest causes in the whole world, I have a couple of monthly columns in magazines, one of which is High Times, believe it or not. And, it's a strange thing for an ex-narc who hasn't had a beer or a joint. I've had no mind-altering chemicals in 18 years. It'll be 19 in January. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I work a lot with men in recovery. I've written more than 30 articles on the subject of drug addiction and recovery for the U.S. Journal of Drug and Alcohol Dependence, and I can tell you that drug addiction is a medical, social, and spiritual problem. It is not a criminal problem. And one of the most frightening things that I saw in the wake, and we're going to wind this up here, and I'm going to hit you with everything that I got. One of the most frightening things that I saw in the wake of the attacks was a story that showed right here. This is from the New York Post. That the two companies, most of you know that some 30 to 40% of the prison inmates in this company are housed by private corporations who trade their stock on Wall Street based upon the number of human beings that they're housing in prison. That's what our economy has evolved into. We are a search and destroy economy. A snake eating its own tail is not nutritious, yet that's what we're doing. And I saw that the stocks of these two companies, Corrections Corporation of America and Wackenhut, went up 300% in the, 2 weeks after the attacks. And not only that, you read this story, and there was an urgent request outside of the budget for 40,000 new prison beds. That's before the next year's budget. Now, does anybody here think there are 40,000 Islamic terrorists in this country? Who are those beds for? I'll tell you when I get there, you know? Okay? But the Bureau of Prisons budget request next year is supposed to ask for something, and this is not confirmed, but I've heard on the order of 400,000 new prison beds. Maybe more.
Do you have that on your site?
What I just showed you was in one of the issues of the newsletter on the site, yes. Now, in January of this year, when the Bush administration took office, these are the folks that brought us savings and loan with Lockheed Martin, DynCorp, looting $2 trillion out of the Department of Defense, $59 billion out of HUD. That's to sustain this bubble, to maintain the grip on power of this CFR trilateral group that has taken us into a war for Central Asian oil before the age of oil ends. And in January I said, they're going to go after Social Security. You mark my words. The savings and loan was just a warm-up. And here I find this story, or this letter, written to the Honorable Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who is the head of the President's Commission to strengthen, Newspeak, Orwell, strengthen Social Security. And the letter is from two members of Congress. It's from Henry Waxman, I don't have the second page, and one other member of Congress. And you know what they're saying? You've locked us out of your meetings. You're having closed-door, classified meetings on Social Security. We're the members of the Ways and Means Committee that are charged with Social Security oversight, and you have locked us out of the meetings. Does that scare you? It scares me. They've just been writing letters so far. Hey, listen, I'm going to come to this, but, there's a few bright lights on the hill. They aren't fully bright yet, but there are some people speaking out. And in the wake of the total assault on American civil liberties, Patrick Leahy, forgive me, had the temerity to write 6 letters to Attorney General John Ashcroft demanding that he testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee on such matters as military tribunals and Ashcroft's unilateral decision to begin wiretapping attorney-client conversations in terrorist cases. And he said, I demand that you respond to me in writing. I think it was by the 13th. Well, he got a response in writing, but it was an anthrax letter. You notice they're only going to Democrats? All right, now let's look at this. H.R. 3162, the Patriot Act. Hey, let's hear it for the Patriot Act. Now it's group therapy. That's good. Okay. In the most recent issue of From the Wilderness, we covered some of the highlights or the lowlights of this bill. And I want you to listen to me very closely. This is your Constitution. We're coming now to pay the bill for the price that you, and remember how I defined you at the beginning of this presentation as all of the American people who failed to reconcile accounts after the assassination of John Kennedy, of Bobby Kennedy, of Martin Luther King, of Iran-Contra, of Vietnam, of Panama, of savings and loan, of the genocide of 2 million people in Rwanda, of the rendering to radioactive waste of large portions of Iraq with depleted uranium that's contaminated with plutonium, the displacement of 1 million people in Colombia within the last year. The bills are coming due, and now it's your turn to pay. The Patriot Act that was passed just recently includes several provisions. First of all, the FBI can enter your home in a criminal investigation. I think it's criminal. They might have said terrorist. It doesn't make any difference how you define it. When you're not there, without a search warrant, they may seize whatever they want to seize and use it to convict you in a court of law for a crime when you didn't even know they came. Now, how many people know that the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution is supposed to protect us against unreasonable searches and seizures? The Patriot Act also permits the CIA to share its intelligence files with local law enforcement. Now, what does that mean? Everybody knows the agency's been wiretapping people illegally for a long time. So is the FBI, COINTELPRO. I mean, you know, but the deal was is that information, because it wasn't obtained under a warrant, could never be introduced into court as evidence. Now when the CIA turns all that information over to the Los Angeles Police Department or the Chicago Police Department, they can write that up as a probable cause statement, go out and find one other piece of evidence, and put it all into court. Gee, the Fourth Amendment is gone. The exclusionary rule is gone. The Act also provides that local police agencies can share their intelligence with the CIA, who may in turn share it with foreign intelligence agencies. We have the beginnings of a global secret police. Echelon is a program of wiretapping run by the United States, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And it was originally set up on the premise, gee, it's illegal for CIA to wiretap Americans, but there's nothing wrong with the Canadians doing it. And Americans will wiretap the British, and the Australians will wiretap, and then we all share it. That's Echelon. And now all that information now under the Patriot Act can now be used in terrorist criminal prosecutions. And it's going to get worse for you in just a minute here, if it isn't bad enough already. Okay. In addition, the Patriot Act allows cops to search for judges. You don't have to go to a judge in your jurisdiction. You can go to Joe Friendly Judge, thereby cutting out any judge that might refuse a warrant because it's not illegal. Or because it's illegal, excuse me. Now we have John Ashcroft saying he's going to wiretap attorney-client conversations in terrorist cases. Terrorist cases I'm only going to do it, I swear, you know, involving cases of terrorists with foreigners. Now, the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution says that we have an absolute right against self-incrimination, and protected communications are those between an attorney and his client, a husband and his wife, a priest or a spiritual leader and his confessor. Gone. We have President George Walker Bush announcing by fiat, and it evoked a stirring series of editorials by conservative columnist William Safire, that he will now have military tribunals to try terrorists, could be held here in the United States. And in those military tribunals, they don't have to reveal evidence if it's in the interest of national security. They don't have to disclose the voting. They don't have to publicize the trial, and the person convicted can be executed even if 1/3 of the officers disagree. The Sixth Amendment to the United States Constitution provides the right to a fair and speedy trial, the right to confront one's accusers and to examine the evidence against him. Also under the Patriot Act, it is legal for the FBI to come into any business on a terrorist investigation and seize all of the business records. And what's more, there's a clause in there that says that if it's your business, you can't tell anybody that the FBI was there or they can lock you up. There goes the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, part of the First Amendment. Now, people who read this, who want to defend the Bush administration, will say, good grief, they wrote a sunset clause into this. It's supposed to go away after 4 years. Well, if you read the sunset clause, and it's in my last issue of From the Wilderness, there's a provision in there that says this clause applies except for in any case where where the investigation was begun before the sunset clause takes effect. The sunset clause doesn't exist. All they have to say is we started this investigation before it's a date in 2005. And there is no sunset clause. There is no Santa Claus, maybe. This is just the beginning. I didn't become a policeman to break laws. I became a policeman to protect people and to enforce laws.
In the article in Inside Magazine, it was mentioned that you didn't get a chance to read the bill completely before you had to vote on it. Is that true?
You know, that is interesting because a lot of people are fascinated with that possibility, and it is true. And they think, well, is this the first time that's happened? And I say, no. Anything that's important, that's the usually way they do it. Unfortunately, what they do is they pull these shenanigans and say, you don't have much time. But we looked real hard for that bill. And even while I was going to the floor, the staff still could not get it off the internet. So that in itself should have been a reason for everybody to vote against it. So there was not a full disclosure there. We had an idea that they were taking a reasonably bad bill and substituting a very bad bill, which was the Senate version. The House had actually cleaned up the Senate version to some degree, but they switched it at the last minute. We did not have it in front of us, so that even made it that much easier to vote against.
And I am a very poor example. 23 years. I've been shot at twice. I've been made homeless. I've been forced into bankruptcy. I was told that if I ever had children, they'd be killed. I was denied employment. I was arrested on phony charges. I've had all of that in 23 years, and yet my sacrifice pales by comparison to some brave men I know. And I'll mention two out of dozens that I know. One is Celerino Castillo, a DEA agent who lives in McAllen, Texas, in poverty, who watched the CIA loading planes full of cocaine at Ilopango Airfield in El Salvador, who confronted Vice President George Bush then, and who was told to leave it alone. It's a White House operation. The DEA forced him out and almost killed him like Serpico. And the other is a Marine colonel by the name of Jim Sabo, who caught those CIA C-130s flying cocaine onto his base at El Toro Marine Air Station and was murdered because of it. People like us, and I'm just one of many, have been trying to tell people like you that unless you face this now and pay the price, this is what the end result is going to be, and it's only going to get worse. Catherine Austin Fitts has a great saying, if we can face it, God can fix it. But it can't happen until we face it. Now let me show you what's on the drawing boards. This is being debated right now. Model State Emergency Health Powers Act as of October 23rd. This goes in conjunction with the 300 million doses of smallpox vaccine that are being ordered. This is an act that will give state and local governments the right to seal off neighborhoods, herd people into stadiums, close down all transportation, water, and communications, seal off everything, suspend the Constitution, seize property, and suspend the writ of habeas corpus. All justified under a supposed threat of massive biological warfare. This is being debated right now. The criminality of this regime is out of the closet. I noticed it was out of the closet in May when Citibank bought Banamex. They don't care anymore. They're arrogant. But I got news for you. These guys, and especially George W. Bush, play in a rigged game. They've always played in a rigged game. And those who play in a rigged game get stupid because they don't have to perform. Their arrogance gets them. Now, if you have any lingering doubts, and you can go to my website and read all of these documents of Operation Northwoods. These are declassified top secret documents from 1962 showing that the Joint Chiefs of Staff had planned to shoot down 2 American airliners and blame it on Fidel Castro for the purpose of getting a war with Cuba. You don't have to believe me. Go read the declassified documents yourself. They don't care about us. Okay? They're all on the website. The victorious warlord set to open opium floodgates. The Northern Alliance is planting opium poppies hand over fist, and the CIA will control that drug trade and control the money to keep the bubble on Wall Street afloat. Now, I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. I may have scared you, and I love it when people come up to me and say, Mike, what am I supposed to do? And I know that in your head you're saying, you don't want me to tell you what you're supposed to do because what you want me to tell you is something that'll let you go home, drink a beer, watch your television set, and manage your 401k plan. Okay? Yeah, you can write, and I got to tell you, From the Wilderness, my newsletter has doubled in size since September the 11th. And you know what I'm doing with the money? I'm hiring reporters and I'm writing more stories. One thing you can do... One thing you can do is vote with your money. Stop giving money to people who lie to you. Okay? Now, I'll give you a little word of inspiration. I'll give you, this is a comment on the Patriot Act. It says our forefathers would think it's time for a revolution. This is why they revolted in the first place. They revolted against much milder oppression. And who said it? A Republican Congressman, Ron Paul of Texas.
To vote against the Patriot Act was a very easy vote for me. To me, it was a clear violation of the civil liberties of all Americans. It was called Patriot Act because they didn't want anybody to vote against it, claiming that if you didn't vote for it, you weren't a patriotic American citizen. I think it was probably the opposite way. I think those who voted for it voted for a bill that undermined the Fourth Amendment, the whole principles of individual freedom and liberty in this country. So it was very easy for me to oppose a bill that would just open up Pandora's box with search warrants and the whole ability to wiretap and listen to all our communications, whether they were on the internet, and check on websites, the whole works. It was very easy for me to vote against that bill.
And there are other actions taken by the administration, including military tribunals and Attorney General Ashcroft's announcement that he was going to wiretap attorney-client conversations. How do those make you react?
I guess there are two there. I don't like what he's doing, but the other part is how did we get to this point in our history where our administration, our presidents, and our attorney generals do this by fiat? Just come up and declare, well, there's going to be new military tribunals set up, or we're going to wiretap communications between the accused and their lawyers, and they didn't even confer with the Congress. So I would say that's very bad. Of course, there's the slippery slope there. They say, well, we're only going to do this with the terrorists. Well, how do we know who the terrorists are if they haven't had a trial? So the whole thing is just outlandish for a country that pretends to protect the rights of the accused, and we challenge other countries like Peru in recent years for setting up these type of tribunals. So I think that moving in this direction is a serious challenge to the whole principles of the the 10 amendments and the Constitution.
For all the FBI agents in the audience, a revolution can be anything. But I will tell you this, that a revolution, according to Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Monroe, and all of the founding fathers, is my divine right. One of the most offensive statements I have heard since September the 11th was Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge, when he was sworn in. And he said, civil liberties are one of the most precious gifts that we give our citizens. I got news for you, Governor Ridge. These are inalienable rights. You don't give nothing to me, we give them to you. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus, and it led to one of the most powerful and most important trials that ever reached the Supreme Court of the United States. The case was Ex parte Milligan. And this is what they had to say. They said, the Constitution of the United States is a law for rulers and people equally in war and in peace, and covers with the shield of its protection all classes of men at all times and under all circumstances. No doctrine involving more pernicious consequences was ever invented by the wit of man than that any of its provisions can be suspended during any of the great exigencies of government. That was when we had a Supreme Court. Now, I want you to bear in mind, you may think that the system of government is still mildly working here. That, well, we had a law and you know what, so Congress is working, but you know, Congress is totally subdued. They're rolled over, they're not fighting, so you think it's the court. But bear in mind that the current Supreme Court is the one that illegally gave George W. Bush the election victory. And when I say illegally, I mean it was a butchery in the major media, because the Florida law said the clear intent of the voter. And what happened was the Supreme Court stopped the counting when there were thousands of ballots left uncounted that would have shown the clear intent of the voter, and said, we're going to make a one-case exception here, and we're going to say that we stopped the count, and we're going to just recount the votes that we have and ignore the votes where we could still determine the clear intent of the voter. That was an illegal decision. So where do you go after that?
The first most important thing that the American people should remember is how George Bush came to the White House. 1, through fraud, and 2, through buying the election. The most money ever spent in the history of the United States for this office. That's a crime, and that's a shame.
All right, we are living, get this, in an empire. Bill Sapphire said this about George W. Bush. He said, on what legal meat does this our Caesar feed? Bill Sapphire said that. Okay? And it is an empire. Now, I want to go all the way back, and I want to take you back, before I shut up here, and leave you with one of my favorite quotes of all time. The foundation of all mental illness is the avoidance of legitimate suffering. And the country is mentally ill. It'll wake up sooner or later. I don't know when. I'm not God. I don't know where this is going. I know that my job is to teach. My job is to give you information. And my job is to clarify for you what's at stake here.
Let's look at the fact that, and this is the most important point, it appears to me that the American people might have a criminal syndicate running their government.
This will be especially important if we were to consider changing the structure of the intelligence community, and that is the challenge of...
What's at stake here is your liberty. This is a criminal administration. It will not stop. It cannot turn back. President Bush broke the Presidential Records Act of 1978 by refusing to release the Ronald Reagan papers. Arbitrarily broke the law. John Ashcroft broke the law by ordering wiretaps of attorney-client conversations in terrorist cases. The Supreme Court doesn't exist. They're grabbing for the power right now, and you better rest assured, as sure as I'm standing here tonight, that the war that's supposed to be taking place against terrorism is also a war against you. Thank you very much.